Well, I think it should be, first of all, friendly. Second, the big thing about the U.S. that is really important to understand, we've been the imperium. In fact, we viewed ourselves as the empire. Empires tend to rule by divide et impera, meaning divide and conquer, divide and rule. And so the United States, in region after region of the world, has actually pressed division. This may be counterintuitive, but we like to stir up trouble in regions and pit countries against each other so that some come running under our wing. And so the reason that I say this is that what has the U.S. done in the Middle East since 1978? In 1978, 79, Zbig Brzezinski had the idea. He was a clever person, but this was a pretty world-changing step. He said, we're going to provoke the Soviet Union to invade Afghanistan. We're going to do it by funding jihadists, the Mujahideen, and that's going to cause the Soviets to come in, and we're going to trap them in a war by funding jihadists fighting the Soviet-backed government of Afghanistan. So we did that, typical CIA operation. I'd say 44 years later, one of the great disasters of all time, and boomeranged on us incredibly. Okay, that was one thing in 1979, triggering what turned out to be more than 4 decades of war in Afghanistan, leaving that country in complete ruins. Same time, that was the Iranian crisis. We decided we'd kill the new Islamic regime of Iran. So from 1980 onward, we funded Iraq, Saddam, to fight a absolutely bloody war throughout the 1980s with Iran. And then we took every step to do everything we could to kill the Iranian regime from then until now, with just a few tiny iterations. Then in 2011, Hillary Clinton and Obama got the not so bright idea in their head, why don't we overthrow Bashar al-Assad? And we unleashed the so-called Syrian civil war. It was really a CIA-backed operation to overthrow the Syrian government. I mention all of this in the context of your question because Saudi Arabia knows we've been everywhere meddling and stirring up trouble all over this region, from the Middle East, the Gulf, and Western Asia. In fact, all of the major players know it: Iran, Turkey, the Saudis, and so forth, the Egyptians, and so on. So what's happened recently is that China stepped in to do something absolutely dazzling and completely beyond the imagination of an American strategist. And that is that the Chinese brought the Iranians and the Saudis together to make peace. Unbelievable, by the way. You wouldn't have found 1 in 1,000 in Washington that would have said, it's not even possible. What do the Chinese know about this? And the Saudis and Iranians. Our whole game plan was based on that supposed Sunni-Shia conflict being unresolvable. And the Chinese resolved it. The Chinese brought Bashar al-Assad back into the Arab League at the meeting, and he was at the meeting just a couple of days ago, reaccepted. So if you ask how the Saudis view the United States right now, they view the United States as saying, God, this is a country that is just enmeshed in conflict, and actually we need to get moving to something bigger at this point. So unless the United States changes its approach, I don't think it's going to play in the Middle East. I think the countries in the Middle East are frankly, a little bit tired of all of the wars that the U.S. has stirred up.
So, Jeff, let's discuss the war in Ukraine. You believe the U.S. government is falsely claiming that this war started with an open quote, unprovoked attack by Russia, close quote. And then in reality, we should be recognizing the role that NATO enlargement has played. Say more?
Well, back in 1990, Gorbachev, who was a kind of dream for the world to end the Cold War peacefully, said, I'm going to disband the Warsaw Pact military alliance. And James Baker III and Hans Dietrich Genscher jumped in and said, if you do that, we promise NATO won't move 1 inch eastward. And there's a great archival summary of all of that collected by George Washington University National Archives Project that shows how many times NATO leaders, US leaders, German leaders told Gorbachev and then told Yeltsin, okay, no NATO enlargement. Of course, by 1992, when the Soviet Union was no more, our neocons, and at that point it was Cheney, Wolfowitz, and Rumsfeld, started planning NATO enlargement. I mean, our promises lasted a nanosecond in a historical time. And I spoke with a historian, leading historian recently. I won't say his name because he hasn't published this work yet, but he was telling me that in the archives, he finds records already in 1992 that the intention is that NATO will expand to Ukraine. It's incredible to my mind. So in 1997's Big Brzezinski spells out in Foreign Affairs the timeline for NATO enlargement, and he gets it almost exactly because he wasn't surmising what it should be. He was reporting, of course, what the inside plan was in Washington and letting the foreign affairs community around the Council on Foreign Relations understand what all this was about. And from the mid-1990s, this became a public debate because a lot of people told Clinton, including America's leading diplomats, don't do that. This will provoke a new Cold War. And even Bill Perry, Clinton's Secretary of Defense, thought about resigning in protest over Clinton's, and it was Madeleine Albright and the Democratic Party neocons. Don't do this. This is absolutely reckless. Well, what happened, as we now know, and it was just like Zbig said it and wrote in 1997, the NATO enlargement went in 3 stages. First stage was Poland, Hungary, and Czech Republic. Second stage under George W. Bush Jr. was in 2004, 7 more countries right up to Russia's border, but in this case with the Baltic states. So it was Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, and then on the Black Sea, Romania and Bulgaria, and then Slovenia and Slovakia. Putin gives a famous speech in the Munich Security Conference in 2007, where he says, would you stop it? This is a threat to our core national security. Do not move any closer. Well, 2008, the neocon agenda continued just on track. Victoria Nuland, by the way, who's now our Undersecretary of State and is probably the single continuity of the American deep state in both political parties, because she was Cheney's advisor, then she was ambassador to NATO in 2008, and now she's Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs. In 2008, George W. pushed that at the Bucharest NATO summit, we would commit to NATO enlarging to Ukraine and to Georgia. And this really freaked out the Russians, because if you look at the map, what we were literally doing was surrounding Russia in the Black Sea. The idea was Ukraine, Romania, Bulgaria, Turkey, and Georgia, exactly the countries that surround the naval base in Sevastopol, would all be NATO members. And Putin told Bush then in Bucharest, because the day after the NATO conference, there was a NATO-Russia meeting. He said, if you do this, this is likely to go terribly wrong. Well, what I saw was what happened next, which is that a pro-Russian president of Ukraine was elected, Viktor Yanukovych. He said, we need neutrality between the two sides. And neutrality was against the neocon purpose. And when protests erupted against Yanukovych in late 2013, there was Victoria Nuland flying back and forth nonstop to Kiev to help orchestrate what turned out to be a violent overthrow of Yanukovych in February 2014. That's when the war began. And I know we were very deeply involved in what was essentially a coup. And Yanukovych left. A Russophobic series of governments came in, all wanting NATO membership. And at the end of 2021, just to bring us up to the current moment, Putin put a diplomatic initiative on the table on December 17, 2021, actually a draft agreement between Russia and the United States on security matters. And I read it. I thought, yeah, this is absolutely the right basis for a diplomatic outcome. I actually called the White House and had a long talk with one of the top people and said, negotiate, for heaven's sake. You know, what Putin's put on the table is absolutely reasonable because NATO enlargement to Ukraine could get us all blown up. No, Jeff, it's got nothing to do with this. And anyway, NATO's an open door. And if Ukraine wants it, we're not going to stop it. Just baloney, by the way, complete baloney, as if the United States would say to Mexico, yeah, if you want to have a military alliance with Russia or China, that's just fine with us. Or say that to Canada. You know, you can imagine what would happen here if anybody tried that unwise step. Well, we told Putin point blank in January 22, we will not discuss with you the issue of NATO enlargement because it has nothing to do with you. We will not allow any third country, meaning you, have any say over where NATO goes. And if you read the minutes of the Russian National Security Council meeting of February 21st or Putin's speech to the nation that night, they said, look, we tried diplomacy. We tried to discuss this. We got the door slammed in our face, and we're not going to tolerate NATO on our 1,900 kilometer border with Ukraine. So to my mind, Biden blew it badly. And we're at war now, and they still won't admit the truth. And one of the things I wrote in that article, Scott, is we can't barely get a discussion in this country going. I tried actually to publish something in the New York Times. They wouldn't take it in the end after they accepted it. They accepted it, then they said, nah, we're not going to really run it. I said, come on, you guys are writing all the time that this is an unprovoked war. This was provoked. You need to run something. Yeah, maybe, I don't know. So this is why it's so hard to have an actual debate in this country. It's an inside job, and it's dangerous. So that's really the point of my article.